Chapter 1: The Call Below. The commission arrived via bonded courier, not email. A thick vellum envelope sealed with wax bearing an unfamiliar sigil, a stylized eye within concentric circles, addressed simply to Elara Vance, conservator. Inside, the letter detailed a short-term, high-compensation contract requiring absolute discretion. The Panopticon Bibliotheca Ultima needed her specific expertise for delicate restoration work on unique acquisitions housed within its lower archival levels. It mentioned water damage, extensive ink bleeding, fragile substrates, challenges Elara relished. The offered sum was indecently large. Elara, whose small workshop breathed the scent of aging paper and conservation adhesives, ran a finger over the embossed sigil. The Panopticon Library. Legends whispered about it among bibliophiles and historians. A colossal structure, purpose-built centuries ago by an eccentric magnate, rumored to hold copies of everything ever printed, and perhaps things never meant to be printed at all. Most considered it myth, a book lover's fantasy of Alexandria crossed with Borgs. Yet here was proof of its existence and a summons to its depths. Curiosity warred with a faint tremor of unease. The phrasing of the letter, formal yet oddly evasive about the collection's nature, pricked at her professional caution. But the money and the sheer audacity of the place. She signed the non-disclosure agreement, its clauses draconian, and returned it via the same silent courier. 2 weeks later, a black car with opaque windows collected her. The journey ended before a building that defied architectural sanity. It wasn't merely large, it was cyclopean, a brutalist eruption of granite and darkened glass that clawed at the overcast sky. No signs marked its entrance, only monolithic doors that hissed open at the car's approach, revealing a lobby vast and chillingly silent. Polished black floors reflected cold, recessed lighting. The air hummed with a low, subliminal thrum, the sound of immense power held in check. A severe woman in a charcoal-gray uniform, head archivist Ollivander Quill, met her. Quill's face was sharp angles and suppressed disapproval. "Ms. Vance, your reputation precedes you. Punctuality is appreciated." Her voice was devoid of warmth. "Your work area is prepared. Level -12. You will be escorted." The descent was unnerving. Not a public elevator, but a humming, pressurized cage operated by Quill herself using a multi-keyed console. Level numbers counted down past 0 into negatives. The pressure popped Elara's ears. The humming deepened, vibrating through the soles of her boots. Light diminished with each passing level. -9. The cage shuddered to a halt at. The doors opened onto a circular corridor dimly lit by caged bulbs set into the low, arched ceiling. The air was cool, stagnant, heavy with the scent of old paper, dust, and something else. Something metallic, sharp, ink. A staggering amount of ink. "Silas will guide you from here," Quill stated, gesturing towards a figure standing motionless further down the corridor. "He is our most experienced lower-level attendant. He does not speak. Follow his directions precisely. Your workspace is designated. Adhere to the designated pathways. Do not deviate. Do not touch materials outside your assignment. Report any irregularities immediately via the comm panel in your workspace. Understand?" Elara nodded, swallowing. "Understood." Quill gave a curt nod, stepped back into the cage, and the doors closed, leaving Elara in the oppressive silence of level -12. The figure Quill called Silas approached. He was ancient, impossibly thin, dressed in the same gray uniform, though his seemed worn, almost fused to his skeletal frame. His eyes, sunken in a web of wrinkles, held a profound, unsettling awareness. He carried a small, smudged whiteboard and a marker. He offered no greeting, simply turned and began walking, his soft-soled shoes making almost no sound on the stone floor. Elara followed, her footsteps echoing unnervingly loud in comparison. The corridor curved endlessly, lined with towering steel shelves packed tight with books, ledgers, scrolls, and containers of indeterminate shape. Each section was marked with complex alphanumeric codes stenciled in faded paint. The sheer scale was dizzying. The panopticon design became apparent. The corridor was one massive ring, and glancing inwards through gaps in the shelving revealed tier upon tier plunging into darkness below and rising into gloom above. In the immense central void, obscured by distance and shadow, she could just perceive the suggestion of a structure, the central observation tower mentioned in architectural whispers. A shiver traced its way down her spine. The air felt heavy, watchful. Silas paused occasionally, pointing with a bony finger at specific junctions, then continuing. He moved with an unnerving economy of motion, a familiarity born of decades spent in this twilight world. The silence was broken only by Elara's breathing, the faint hum of unseen machinery, and an occasional drip, 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 echoing from somewhere unseen. Water damage, Quill had said. It sounded plausible. They reached a heavy steel door marked Restoration Chamber 12 Gamma. Silas produced a keycard, swiped it, and pushed the door inward. He gestured for Elara to enter, then wrote on his whiteboard, "Workspace. Tools provided. Subject on table. Follow protocol." He tapped the comm panel on the wall, a simple box with a single red button. He wrote again, "Use only for emergencies," or "Schedule pickup." He met her eyes, his expression unreadable but intense, then turned and shuffled away into the gloom, vanishing around the curve. The chamber was functional, sterile. Stainless steel tables, conservation lamps, humidifiers, trays of specialized tools far exceeding what Elara had expected. The air filtration system hummed slightly louder here. On the central table lay the object of her commission, a massive, iron-bound ledger, easily a meter wide when opened. Its leather cover was warped, stained black in sprawling patterns that looked less like water damage and more like something had bled onto it. Thick, viscous ink had seeped through the cover, stiffening the leather, crusting in the tooling. The pages within were worse. Thick parchment leaves fused together, the elegant script obscured by blooms of midnight black ink that seemed to have erupted from within the text itself, consuming it. Elara donned gloves and an apron, adjusting her task lighting. This was beyond typical ink corrosion or water damage. The ink had a strange texture, almost oily, and it emitted that faint metallic tang stronger here. She carefully began assessing the damage, documenting everything with a digital camera. The sheer volume of ink was perplexing. It wasn't just saturation. It looked like gallons had been spilled, soaked, absorbed into the very fabric of the book over years. Hours passed. The silence of the chamber pressed in. Outside, the only sound was the infrequent, distant drip. Elara became absorbed, gently testing the fused pages with a separation spatula, considering solvent options. The script, where visible, was archaic, beautiful, but in a language she didn't recognize. Strange marginalia, complex diagrams resembling star charts or circuit boards, peeked through the overwhelming blackness. She worked on a particularly stubborn fused section near the spine. As she applied minute pressure with the spatula, a tiny flake of the dried black crust chipped off. It landed on the steel table. Elara paused, watching it. The flake quivered. She leaned closer, holding her breath. It wasn't just a quiver. It was a slow, deliberate crawl, a speck of dried ink, no bigger than a pinhead, moving with apparent purpose across the sterile metal. It left no trail. It simply moved. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She blinked, certain it was eye strain, a trick of the focused light. She nudged the flake gently with the tip of her spatula. It stopped, then abruptly scuttled sideways, faster this time, seeking the shadowed edge of the table. Before she could react, it reached the edge and dropped off, vanishing into the gloom below. Elara stood frozen, spatula held aloft. Her carefully constructed professional detachment shattered. That was impossible, utterly impossible. Stress, she told herself. The pressure, the weird environment, the isolation. She took a deep breath, pushing the incident from her mind, forcing herself back to the damaged ledger. Later, concentrating fiercely on softening a fused page corner with controlled humidity, she heard it. Not the familiar drip from the corridor. This was closer, inside the room. A soft, wet, slithering sound, coming from beneath the table where the ink flake had fallen. She slowly lowered her tools, straining her ears. Silence. Had she imagined it? The hum of the filtration system seemed louder now. She forced herself to remain calm, to rationalize. Old buildings made noises. Pipes settled. Then a distinct drip, not water, thicker. It landed audibly on the floor near her feet. Elara looked down. A glistening black droplet the size of a coin lay on the smooth concrete floor. As she watched, paralyzed, another dripped beside it, then another. She tracked the source upwards with her eyes, her blood running cold. Clinging to the underside of the heavy steel table directly beneath the damaged ledger was a small, dark stain. It pulsed slowly like something absorbing liquid, and it was growing. Drip, drip, drip. Tiny beads of viscous blackness gathered and fell, forming a small, spreading puddle on the floor. These weren't random drips. This was deliberate. Something was leaking from the book, coalescing beneath the table, forming something else. From the corridor, faint but distinct, came a new sound, weaving through the silence. A chorus of tiny, wet whispers, seeming to emanate from the walls themselves, overlapping, incoherent, like recorded voices played backwards and submerged underwater. Whispering smudges. The term sprang, unbidden, into her mind, chilling her to the bone. Elara scrambled backwards, away from the table, away from the dripping stain, her eyes wide with terror. The calm panel on the wall, with its single red button, seemed miles away. The whispers from the corridor grew fractionally louder, drawing nearer. The puddle on the floor shifted, its edges seeming to tentatively explore the concrete. She was no longer alone in the chamber, and whatever was out there was coming closer. The silence of level -12 was a lie. Chapter 2: Echoes in Ink. Panic seized Elara, cold and sharp. Her breath hitched. The comm panel seemed impossibly distant, separated by the growing pool of glistening blackness on the floor and the thing coalescing beneath the table. The whispers intensified, slithering through the air from the corridor, a sibilant tide rising against the silence. They weren't just random sounds, they were fragmented words, half-formed sentences snatched from countless texts, mangled and layered into a chorus of pure dread. Soul's dissolution. Axiomatic failure, bind the flesh, theorem disproven, forever falling. She stumbled backward, bumping against a steel trolley laden with conservation chemicals. Bottles clinked precariously. Her gaze darted between the poolsing stain under the table and the heavy chamber door. Escape. She needed to escape. The puddle on the floor rippled. A tendril of black fluid, thick as tar, stretched tentatively from its edge, elongating across the concrete towards her foot. It moved with a slow, deliberate quality that defied gravity and inertia. It was reaching. Elara choked back a scream and lunged sideways, scrambling towards the comm panel. Her hand reached for the red button, a beacon of hope, a link to the sane world above. A bony hand clamped down hard on her wrist, stopping her movement inches from the panel. She gasped, spinning around. Silas stood directly behind her, appearing as silently as a shadow. His face, illuminated by the harsh overhead light, was grim, his ancient eyes fixed not on her but on the growing horror beneath the table. He shook his head once, a sharp, definitive gesture. "Don't touch the button." He released her wrist and thrust his smudged whiteboard towards her. Scrawled hastily in black marker, "Noise attracts, comms compromised. Follow." Compromised. What did that mean? Before Elara could process it, Silas gripped her upper arm, his fingers surprisingly strong, and pulled her bodily away from the wall, towards the chamber door. He moved with an urgency that belied his age. The ink creature under the table had grown larger now, a quivering mound perhaps half a meter across. More tendrils snaked out, exploring the floor, leaving slick trails. The dripping from the ledger above had slowed, as if the source was transferring its substance into this new form. The whispers from the corridor were louder, closer, seeming to press against the closed door. Silas reached the door, keeping Elara behind him. He didn't use his key card. Instead, he leaned close to the seam, listening intently. His expression tightened. He glanced back at Elara, then pointed emphatically down the corridor in the opposite direction from which they had arrived. He held up one finger. "Wait." He pressed his ear to the cold steel again. The whispers outside were a low, insistent murmur now, punctuated by wet, sliding sounds. Silas remained utterly still for a long moment, then seemed to reach a decision. He pulled the heavy door inward just a crack, peering out. Elara strained to see past him. The corridor lighting seemed dimmer than before. Shadows pooled thickly between the towering shelves, and the air, it shimmered faintly in places like heat haze but cold. Small, dark smudges clung to the walls and ceiling further down the passage, some dripping slowly, contributing to the cacophony of whispers. The whispering smudges weren't just auditory, they were physical. They were multiplying. Silas eased the door open wider. He gave Elara a sharp, commanding look and gestured again. Follow. Now, quietly. He slipped out into the corridor, moving with that unnerving silence. Elara hesitated for only a second. A glance back showed the ink creature detaching itself from the underside of the table, landing on the floor with a soft, wet thump. It was a roughly formed blob, featureless but undeniably mobile. Staying was not an option. She followed Silas out, pulling the heavy door shut behind her. The latch clicked with agonizing loudness in the charged silence. The whispers seemed to swirl around them, emanating from the very walls. Silas didn't look back. He moved swiftly, hugging the towering shelves, navigating the endless curve of the corridor. Elara hurried to keep up, her heart pounding. Every shadow seemed to writhe, every drip sounded like a footstep. The panopticon structure felt malevolent now, the unseen central spire a watching eye. Where was Silas taking her? Away from the immediate danger, yes, but deeper into the labyrinthine bowels of level -12. They passed section after section, the classification markers blurring into meaninglessness. The air grew colder, the metallic tang of ink stronger. Here and there, dark stains marred the floor, some dried and cracked, others disturbingly fresh, glistening under the caged bulbs. Elara realized with dawning horror that the incident in the restoration chamber wasn't isolated. This place was saturated with whatever monstrous life brewed from decaying text and spilled ink. Silas paused abruptly at a junction where a narrower service corridor branched off the main ring. He shone a small, dim flashlight produced from somewhere within his worn uniform down the narrower passage. It was choked with dust, discarded shelving parts, and cobwebs thick as shrouds. He looked at Elara, then pointed down the dark passage. He wrote on his board, safer path. Less frequented. Less frequented by whom? Or what? Elara hesitated. The main corridor, though menacing, was at least lit, albeit poorly. The service passage plunged into near total darkness. Silas didn't wait for agreement. He stepped into the oppressive blackness of the side passage, his faint light bobbing ahead. Elara, terrified of being left alone in the main corridor with the whispering smudges potentially closing in, scrambled after him. The narrow passage was claustrophobic. Dust rained down from the low ceiling with every step. Discarded equipment snagged at her clothes. The air was thick, motionless. Silas moved with certainty, his light occasionally glinting off metal pipes running along the walls or deeper recesses filled with refuse. The silence here was different, dead, heavy, absolute. The whispers from the main corridor faded behind them, replaced by the sound of their own breathing and the scuff of their shoes on the debris-strewn floor. After several minutes of tense, near-lightless travel, Silas stopped again. He shone his light on a section of the wall. It looked identical to the rest, grimy concrete blocks, but he pushed against it firmly. A low grinding sound echoed in the confined space as a hidden panel, cleverly disguised as part of the wall, swung inward, revealing a small, dark space beyond. Silas gestured for her to enter. Elara peered inside. It was a small, forgotten utility closet or junction room, barely large enough for two people. Empty metal conduits lined one wall. A single, bare bulb hung from the ceiling, unlit. It smelled of ozone and decay. Silas stepped inside, then turned, waiting for her. Elara entered cautiously. He immediately pulled the hidden panel shut, plunging them into absolute darkness before fumbling for a switch. The bare bulb flickered erratically, then cast a weak, yellow glow over the cramped space. Silas leaned against the wall, breathing slightly heavier than before. He wiped his whiteboard clean with a stained rag and wrote, "Wait here. Bloats patrol main ring after disturbance. Smudges alert them. Chamber gamma now. Active." He paused, then added, "You brought tools." Elara patted the small satchel she always carried, containing her most essential, delicate conservation tools. Scalpels, probes, fine brushes, spatulas. Weapons? Hardly. But tools, yes, she nodded. Silas nodded slowly. He seemed to slump slightly, the urgency draining away, replaced by a bone-deep weariness. He looked incredibly old, trapped in this subterranean nightmare for decades. He sank down to sit on the dusty floor, pulling his knees up to his chest, his eyes watchful, scanning the closed, hidden door. Elara remained standing, her mind racing. Bloats, plural, patrolling. The ink creature in the chamber wasn't unique, it was just one of many. And the whispering smudges were some kind of alarm system, or perhaps scouts. Quill's talk of water damage and ink bleeding was a grotesque understatement. She hadn't been hired for restoration. She'd been brought in as bait, or perhaps an unwitting catalyst for something related to that ink-soaked ledger. What was that book? The silence stretched, broken only by the faint buzz of the bare bulb. Elara's adrenaline began to ebb, leaving behind a cold dread and 1,000 questions. "Silas," she whispered, the sound startlingly loud in the confined space. "What are they, the bloats?" Silas looked up at her. He didn't reach for his whiteboard immediately. He simply held her gaze, and in his ancient, weary eyes, Elara saw not madness but a terrible, resigned certainty. A certainty that spoke of horrors witnessed, of survival bought at a cost she couldn't yet comprehend. He finally picked up the board and marker. His writing was slower now, more deliberate. "Ink, old ink, bad ink." He paused, thinking. Spilled words, forgotten thoughts, bad ideas. He underlined bad ideas twice. They absorb text, memory, life. He looked at her again, his expression conveying a warning more potent than any words. "Don't let them touch you. Don't let them read you." Before Elara could ask more, a faint scratching sound came from the other side of the hidden door. Both Silas and Elara froze. It wasn't the wet slithering of a bloat. It was drier, quicker, like claws on stone or paper being dragged. Silas slowly extinguished the bare bulb, plunging the tiny room back into absolute, suffocating darkness. He pressed a finger to his lips, though no sound was needed to convey the command for silence. The scratching grew louder, moving along the hidden door, searching. Something else was out there, and it knew they were hiding. Chapter 3: The Scrivener's Price. Total darkness pressed against Elara's eyes. The weak bulb's absence felt absolute, swallowing sound as much as light. Only the scratching persisted, unnervingly close on the other side of the hidden panel. It wasn't the wet, heavy sound of a bloat. This was drier, faster, rhythmic. Scritch, scratch, scritch, scratch, like fingernails on stone, or something harder. Beside her, Sela's was utterly still, barely seeming to breathe. Elara held her own breath, listening. The scratching paused, then resumed, moving slightly lower down the panel. A sniffing sound accompanied it, loud in the confined space. Something was smelling for them. A low chuckle echoed faintly through the disguised door, distorted and unpleasant. Hiding, hiding in the dark places. Think all Scrivener doesn't know the bolt holes. Think the ink hasn't shown me. The voice was rough, cracked, laced with a manic energy. Elara's blood ran cold. Scrivener Jones. The mad archivist Sela's had warned her about via Quill's initial briefing, though his name hadn't been used then. He was real, and he was right outside. Sela's shifted slightly, his movement economical even in the pitch black. Elara sensed him reaching for his whiteboard, though she couldn't see it. The scratching stopped again. A heavy thump sounded against the panel, as if someone had leaned their weight against it. "Got new blood, don't you?" The voice rasped, closer now, speaking directly into the seam. "Fresh ink for the taking. Smelled her down the Gamma corridor. Pretty little bookmender come to patch up the wounds. Doesn't work that way. The wounds fester, the wounds speak." Another chuckle, wetter this time. "Open up. Scrivener knows things. Things Sela's won't write down for pretty eyes. Things the ink whispers when it's hungry." Elara pressed herself back against the cold conduits lining the wall, wishing she could melt into them. Sela's remained near the door. She heard the faint squeak of his marker on the whiteboard. Even if he wrote something, how could she read it? "Don't want to talk," Scrivener's voice sharpened. "Fine, maybe the bloats will talk. They're coming, you know, stirred 'em up good down Gamma way. Heard the whispers starting, heard the big one, the father, rumble." He paused. Unless you got something Scrivener needs, something shiny, something sharp." Elara thought of her tool satchel. Scalpels, probes, sharp, yes. Shiny, some. Trade tools for passage, for information. What was this madman's currency? Sela's moved again. A tiny click. Elara realized he'd activated his dim flashlight but cupped the beam tightly, directing a pinprick of light onto his whiteboard. Held low near the floor, it was barely visible, shielded from the door seam by his body. In shaky letters, dangerous, unstable. Do not engage, do not open. The scratching resumed, frantic now, concentrating on one spot near the bottom of the panel. Scritch, scratch, scrape. A flake of concrete dust drifted into the faint torch beam. He was trying to dig his way in. "Got lights in there," Scrivener crowed triumphantly. "Playing possum, not nice. Scrivener shares. Scrivener knows the paths the bloats don't like. Knows where the palimpsest hunts tonight, tradesies." The palimpsest bloat. Sela's had mentioned it earlier. The one that absorbed minds, mimicked voices. Elara shuddered. This place was a layered nightmare. Scrape, crunch. A small crack appeared near the bottom of the panel, admitting a sliver of the faint ambient light from the service corridor. A single, wild eye peered through, bloodshot and darting. "See you." The eye belonged to Scrivener. "Pretty bird in a cage, let Scrivener in, quick, before they smell the light, before they hear the scratching." His voice rose, becoming desperate. Heard Morkant's boys too, down deep, looking for the big one, stirring things better left sleeping. They got boomsticks, make loud noises. Bloats don't like loud noises. Morkant, Dr. Kalen Morkant, the historian. He was down here too, with armed men. Elara looked at Silas, but the old man's face, barely visible in the reflected torchlight, was a mask of grim resignation. He offered no update on the board. The eye vanished. Heavy breathing sounded just outside. Trade bookmender, sharp tool for a safe path, or stay here. Wait for the ink to seep under the door. Wait to be read. Elara's mind raced. Morkant's presence changed everything. Armed men in this environment, it was suicidal. They'd draw every bloat within kilometers. Scrivener, despite his madness, might be their only chance to navigate away from that impending chaos. But Silas was adamant. Do not engage. She felt torn. Logic warred with instinct. The immediate threat was Scrivener trying to break in. The secondary threat was whatever he might do if they let him in. The tertiary threat was the bloats, potentially drawn by the commotion or by Morkant's team. Silas touched her arm. He shone the light back on the board. He lies. LEADS 2 traps. WANTS fresh VICTIMS for his friends. He added a crude drawing of a stick figure being engulfed by an ink blob. Scrivener pounded on the door. Time's up, hear that? Wet footsteps coming this way, let me in. His voice cracked with genuine fear now. Elara could hear it too. A faint, rhythmic slap 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 echoing from down the service corridor, slower than footsteps, heavier, wetter. Silas immediately extinguished the flashlight. Darkness slammed back in. He grabbed Elara's arm again, pulling her deeper into the tiny closet away from the door. The scratching stopped. Scrivener fell silent outside. All sound was swallowed by the approaching slap. Slap, slap. It drew nearer, agonizingly slow. Elara imagined a huge, amorphous mass dragging itself through the debris, slick with ink, sensing, hunting. Would it detect the hidden panel? Would Scrivener's scent trail lead it right to them? The slapping sound paused, seemingly right outside the panel. A low, guttural gurgle vibrated through the concrete. Elara could almost smell the metallic tang of ink intensifying. She squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the inevitable. Then a choked gasp from outside. Scrivener. No, not you. Stay back. A sickening, wet tearing sound. A brief, muffled scream cut short, followed by silence. Profound, terrifying silence. The slapping sound did not resume. The gurgle faded. Elara waited, heart hammering, muscles locked. Beside her, Silas was equally frozen. Minutes stretched into an eternity in the absolute blackness. Had it gone? Had it taken Scrivener and moved on? Slowly, carefully, Silas fumbled for the light switch again. The bare bulb flickered, casting its weak, yellow glow. They were alone in the closet. He moved cautiously to the door panel, pressing his ear against it. He listened for a full minute before nodding almost imperceptibly. He risked cracking the panel open again, just a sliver. He peered out, then pushed it wider. He looked back at Elara, his face pale, etched with horror. He gestured for her to look. Steeling herself, Elara moved to the opening and peered into the service corridor. The weak light from the closet illuminated a horrific tableau. Scrivener Jones was gone. In his place, plastered against the grimy wall opposite the panel, was a fresh, sprawling smear of black, viscous ink, roughly human-shaped. Bits of torn fabric, the remnants of Scrivener's ragged clothes, were suspended within the glistening mass. Tiny rivulets of black were still oozing down the wall from it, pooling on the floor. The bloat hadn't just killed him, it had absorbed him, flattened him against the wall like a gruesome press clipping. Elara gagged, stumbling back into the closet, bile rising in her throat. The image seared itself into her mind. That could have been them. Silas quickly pulled the panel shut again, his movements jerky now. He leaned against it, breathing hard, his eyes shut tight for a moment. When he opened them, he looked at Elara, then quickly wrote on his board. "Gone for now, but it knows this place. We move quickly." He didn't wait for her reply. He checked the corridor again, then slipped out, gesturing urgently for her to follow. Elara hesitated only briefly, the horrific image outside urging her forward. Staying put was death. Moving was a chance. They emerged back into the service corridor, giving the gruesome ink smear a wide berth. Silas led her further down the narrow passage, away from the main ring where the patrol likely continued, away from the site of Scrivener's demise. The passage twisted, turned, sloped downward. The air grew damper, the silence somehow heavier. After several minutes, Silas stopped at another seemingly unremarkable section of wall. This one had faint markings scratched onto it, almost invisible under the grime, complex symbols Elara didn't recognize, but that Silas seemed to read like a map. He consulted them, then chose another branching, even narrower side tunnel, barely more than a crawl space. He shone his light inside. It looked like a ventilation duct, thick with greasy dust. He wrote on the board, "Old system. BYPASSES worst of level 12. LEADS. DEEPER. 2 level 13. Risky. Only way past MORCANT's noise. Level negative 13. Deeper still into the nightmare." Elara looked at the cramped, dark opening, then back the way they came, picturing the ink smear that was Scrivener. There was no choice. "Okay," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Okay." Silas nodded grimly. He got down on his hands and knees and began to crawl into the oppressive darkness of the duct. Elara took a deep breath, tightened the strap of her tool satchel, and followed him down into the unknown. Chapter 4. Descent into 13. The ventilation duct swallowed them whole. Darkness clamped down, thick and absolute, broken only by the feeble, bobbing beam of Silas's small flashlight ahead. The air was dense with decades of disturbed dust, greasy and acrid, stinging Elara's nostrils and coating the back of her throat. She coughed, the sound unnervingly loud in the confined space, and immediately clapped a hand over her mouth, eyes darting nervously in the blackness. Silas paused, glancing back, his expression unreadable in the gloom, before continuing his slow crawl. Progress was agonizingly slow. The duct was barely wide enough for Elara's shoulders. She had to hunch low, scraping her back against the cold metal ceiling. Her knees and elbows screamed in protest against the rough, rivet-studded floor. Loose debris, flakes of rust, petrified clumps of dirt, Occasionally something small and brittle that crunched under her hand littered the way. Every movement echoed, amplified. The sense of enclosure was overwhelming, pressing in from all sides. Claustrophobia, sharp and metallic, clawed at the edges of her composure. Silas moved with a practiced, steady rhythm, his thin frame navigating the tight space with surprising agility. He rarely used the flashlight, relying on memory or some other sense Elara couldn't fathom, flicking it on only at junctions where smaller ducts branched off into deeper blackness, or where the main shaft turned sharply. Sometimes, they passed grated openings in the floor or walls. Peering down through thick grime, Elara caught fleeting glimpses of vast, dark spaces below, more towering shelves, silent machinery shrouded in dust sheets, empty corridors stretching into infinity. Level -12, sliding past beneath them like a forgotten underworld. The silence was profound, broken only by their own efforts, the scrape of denim on metal, ragged breathing, the occasional dislodged pebble skittering ahead. Yet the silence felt thin, brittle, stretched taut over something else. Elara strained her ears, imagining faint whispers carried on the stagnant air currents, picturing glistening ink seeping through hidden seams in the metal. Was this truly safer, or just a different kind of trap? Time lost meaning. Minutes bled into what felt like hours. Her muscles burned, her throat raw, doubt gnawed at her. Trusting Silas, this mute, ancient man who seemed almost a part of the library's decay, felt like a desperate gamble. Where was he taking her? Level -13. Deeper. Always deeper. What horrors awaited them there, worse than the patrolling bloats and whispering smudges above? She thought of the ledger back in Chamber Gamma, the source of the bloat that had absorbed Scrivener. What secrets did it hold? Why was it so saturated, so alive with that malevolent ink? And Morkant, Dr. Kalen Morkant, down here with armed men, searching for something called the Codex Umbra, hunted by the Prime Blot. Were they fools, or did they possess knowledge, some weapon or defense that Elara couldn't conceive of? Their boomsticks, as Scrivener called them, seemed laughably inadequate against creatures born of sentient, consuming ink. Their noise would only draw more attention, faster. At one point, Silas stopped abruptly. He shone his light upwards. Caught in the beam, clinging to the ceiling, were several papery, gray formations, nests. Small, sharp bits of folded paper littered the floor beneath them, paper wasps. He quickly swept the beam away, gesturing for Elara to stay absolutely still. They waited, listening. A faint, dry rustling emanated from the nests. After a long moment, Silas judged it safe to proceed, crawling past with excruciating care, his movements barely disturbing the air. Elara followed, holding her breath, picturing sharp paper wings slicing through the darkness. Further on, the duct began to slope downwards more steeply. The crawling became an awkward, gravity-assisted slide. Silas moved even more cautiously, testing his handholds. The air changed subtly, growing colder, damper. A low, resonant hum, different from the machinery pulse of level 12, vibrated through the metal structure, felt more in the bones than heard. They reached a vertical shaft, wider than the horizontal duct, plunging straight down into blackness. Rungs, slick with grime and moisture, were bolted into one side. Silas shone his light down. The beam was swallowed by the dark after only a few meters. He looked at Elara, then pointed downwards. He wrote on his board, the letters illuminated by the trembling light, Level 13 access. Careful, rungs may be weak. He didn't hesitate. Slinging the flashlight's cord around his neck so it hung, pointing downwards, he grasped the top rung and began his descent, his thin form quickly vanishing below the lip. Elara stared into the abyss. The low hum seemed stronger here, emanating from the depths. The air tasted of ozone, damp earth, and that omnipresent metallic tang of ink, but with an underlying note of something else. Something like decay, but deeper, more fundamental, mineral decomposition. Taking a shaky breath, she gripped the cold, slick metal of the top rung. It felt loose under her hand. She tested it, putting weight on it gingerly. It held. Muttering a silent prayer, she swung her legs over the edge and began the descent, following the faint, dancing light far below. The climb down was terrifying. Each rung seemed looser than the last. Her gloves offered little purchase on the greasy metal. The darkness below felt infinite, a physical presence threatening to pull her into its depths. The humming vibrated through her arms, unsettling, hypnotic. She focused only on the next rung, the small circle of light that was Sela's, ignoring the vast emptiness surrounding her. After what felt like an eternity, her foot touched solid ground. She nearly collapsed with relief, her legs trembling violently. Sela's was waiting, his flashlight beam sweeping across their new surroundings. They stood at the bottom of the shaft, which opened into another corridor, but this one was vastly different from those on level 12. The architecture here was older, cruder. Rough-hewn stone walls replaced the smooth concrete and steel shelves. The ceiling was lower, supported by thick, cyclopean pillars that seemed to grow directly from the rock. Water dripped constantly, echoing in the cavernous space, forming slick pools on the uneven floor. The air was heavy, saturated with moisture and the smell of wet stone and decay. The low hum was pervasive, seeming to emanate from the very rock itself. And the ink, it was everywhere. Not just stains, but thick black veins running through the stone walls like diseased arteries, glistening wetly in the flashlight beam. Some pulsed with a faint, internal luminescence. Level -13 felt less like a library archive, and more like a diseased mine shaft burrowing into the foundations of the world. Sela's swept his light around. No shelves were visible here, only endless, damp stone corridors branching off into oppressive darkness. Strange sigils, unlike the library's classification system, were carved crudely into the pillars and walls, spirals, jagged lines, eye-like shapes that seemed to watch them. He wrote on his board, older, deeper, unstable ground, watch footing. He pointed down one of the main corridors. This way follows the main power conduit. Should bypass worst of geological hazard zones. He paused, then added, Morkant came this way. Elara looked where he pointed. Several meters into the corridor, discarded remnants confirmed his words. Empty ration packs, a high-intensity glow stick cracked open and fatting, and several spent shell casings glinting brassily on the wet stone floor. Gunfire. Down here. Madness. How long ago? Elara whispered. Sela's shrugged, holding up perhaps 4 fingers, then miming an explosion with his hands, followed by a low rumbling sound. Hours, caused disturbance, draw attention. He tapped his ear, then pointed deeper down the corridor they were about to take. Here. Elara strained her ears, filtering out the dripping water, the low hum. Faintly, very faintly, she could hear it. A distant, rhythmic thump, 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 heavy machinery or something else. Something. Moving. It was impossible to gauge distance or direction in these echoing stone tunnels. And beneath that rhythmic thumping, another sound began to emerge, carried on the damp air. A high-pitched, electronic screech, intermittent but piercing, like stressed metal or malfunctioning equipment. Silas's expression tightened. He'd heard it too. He quickly wiped his board and wrote, "Not library tech, Morkins, dangerous." He shone his light on the floor near the spent casings. Dark, wet footprints, multiple sets, some from heavy boots, others disturbingly non-human, large, splayed, leaving an oily residue, led deeper into the tunnel. They started walking, Silas leading, his light cutting a swathe through the oppressive gloom. The stone floor was slick, uneven. The air grew heavier, the humming louder, vibrating in Elara's teeth. The black veins in the walls seemed thicker here, some pulsing rhythmically with that faint, sickening light, in time with the distant thumping. They passed side tunnels plunging into utter blackness, openings that felt like mouths waiting to swallow them. Elara couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, not just by the eye sigils carved into the stone, but by the very structure itself. This level felt fundamentally wrong, ancient and diseased. The rhythmic thumping grew louder, resolving into a heavy, mechanical beat, accompanied by the grinding screech they'd heard earlier. It seemed to be coming from around a bend ahead. Silas slowed, holding up a hand for caution. He edged towards the corner, peering around it carefully. He recoiled slightly, then waved Elara forward, keeping low. She crept up beside him and looked. The corridor opened into a vast cavern, stretching further than the flashlight beam could penetrate. In the center, partially illuminated, was a bizarre and horrifying scene. A massive, archaic piece of machinery, like something from an industrial revolution nightmare, pistons pumping, gears grinding, was somehow operating, connected by thick, pulsating cables snaking across the floor to the glowing black veins in the cavern walls. It seemed to be drawing power directly from the library's dark substrate. Around the machine, figures moved. Men in tactical gear, Morkins' team, their forms tense, weapons ready. But they weren't alone. Lurking in the shadows at the edge of the light, partially obscured by pillars and rock formations, were other shapes. Large, bulky, glistening black. Ink bloats, but different from the one Elara had seen above. These seemed denser, more solid, their forms less amorphous, incorporating chunks of rock and debris into their mass. They moved slowly, deliberately, seemingly corralled or held at bay by sonic devices mounted on tripods, emitting the piercing electronic screech that grated on the nerves. Morkin himself stood near the roaring machine, shouting orders, his face illuminated by flickering readouts on a handheld device. He seemed oblivious, or perhaps indifferent to the monstrous standoff happening yards away. He was focused entirely on the machine, which appeared to be drilling downwards into the cavern floor. Dust and rock chips flew. The entire cavern vibrated. They were drilling deeper still, powered by the library's own dark energy, holding monstrous guardians at bay with sonic weaponry. What were they trying to reach? What lay beneath level 13? Suddenly, the drilling machine sputtered. Sparks flew. The rhythmic thumping faltered. The screeching sonic emitters flickered. One of the emitters went dark entirely. In the sudden lull, a low growl echoed from the shadows where the bloats lurked. One of the rock-encrusted creatures shifted, testing the weakened sonic barrier. Morkant spun around, his face contorted in alarm. Get it back online. Now, keep them contained. Too late. The bloat surged forward, moving with surprising speed, ignoring the shouts and panicked bursts of automatic gunfire that erupted from the guards. Bullets sparked off its rock-studded hide or sank into its inky mass with little effect. It slammed into the malfunctioning machinery, sending sparks showering. Chaos erupted. The standoff shattered. More bloats surged from the darkness. The cavern filled with the roar of gunfire, the screech of stressed metal, the guttural roars of the bloats, and the panicked shouts of Morkant's men. Silas grabbed Elara, pulling her back hard, away from the corner, deeper into the relative safety of the side corridor, just as stray bullets ricocheted wildly off the stone walls near where they had stood. He pressed them both flat against the damp rock, his face grim. The sounds of the desperate battle raged just around the bend, a terrifying symphony of failing technology, human desperation, and monstrous fury. Silas looked at Elara, his eyes wide with alarm, then wrote frantically on his board, the flashlight shaking in his other hand. They woke IT up. Down there, the drill. They woke ITUP. Before Elara could ask what it was, a new sound joined the cacophony from the cavern. A deep, resonant crack like the world splitting open, followed by a tremor that shook the very foundations of level 13. Dust rained from the ceiling. The low, ambient hum abruptly ceased, replaced by a profound, subterranean groan. The battle sounds from the cavern faltered, momentarily silenced by the sheer geological violence. Then, a new wave of panic screams arose, different in quality, laced with utter, abject terror. Something far worse than the bloats had just entered the equation. Chapter 5: The Waking Stone. The subterranean groan intensified, vibrating through the rock under Elara's hands, through the soles of her boots, settling deep in her bones. It wasn't the rumble of collapsing rock alone. It was the sound of something immense shifting, stretching, awakening from eons of slumber deep beneath the library's foundations. Dust showered from the ceiling, thick and choking. The distant sounds of gunfire and blowtrawers from the cavern abruptly cut off, replaced by a new chorus of screams, higher pitched, laced with an absolute primal terror that clawed its way down Elara's spine. Silas shoved her further back into the side corridor, away from the opening to the vibrating cavern. His eyes were wide, reflecting the dim light with stark fear. He fumbled with his whiteboard marker flying across the surface, deep below. Bedrock MOVED. Bad, very bad. Run. Run where? Back the way they came, up the precarious shaft towards the relative safety of level 12, patrolled by alerted bloats, or deeper into this groaning, unstable level, away from whatever nightmare Morkant's drill had unleashed. The choice was ripped from them. A figure staggered into view at the corridor's entrance, retreating from the cavern. One of Morkant's men, his tactical gear torn, face smeared with grime and blood, weapon gone. He wasn't looking behind him. He was looking down at the floor of the cavern entrance, his expression one of slack-jawed disbelief and horror. "It's the stone," he babbled, stumbling backwards towards Elara and Sila's. "Gods, it's the stone." Before he could take another step, the rock floor at the cavern entrance buckled violently upwards. A jagged fissure, black and steaming, split the ground where he had stood moments before. But it wasn't just a crack. From within the fissure something surged, not lava, not magma, but glistening, obsidian-black mass, shot through with pulsing veins of the same diseased light that marked the walls. It moved with unnatural speed, less like geology and more like muscle. A thick tendril of this living rock-ink lashed out, wrapping around the fleeing guard's ankle. He screamed, a raw sound of agony and terror, scrabbling at the stone floor as he was dragged inexorably towards the fissure. "No, let go, it's eating the rock. It's—" His scream was cut short by a sickening crunch as he was pulled into the steaming crack, which sealed shut again with grinding finality, leaving only a fresh, dark scar on the floor. Elara stared, frozen in horror. It wasn't just bloats made of ink and text. The very substance of the library's foundation, corrupted by millennia of seeping knowledge and dark ideas, was alive, and Morkant's drill had woken it up. Sila's needed no further convincing. He grabbed Elara's arm, yanking her away from the horrifying scene, deeper into the side corridor they occupied. Behind them, the groaning intensified, accompanied by sounds of immense weight shifting, rock grinding against rock, punctuated by wet, tearing noises and the final, fatting screams from the cavern. Whatever was happening back there, the battle between Morkant's team and the bloats was brutally over. A far older, far more fundamental power had asserted itself. Sila's didn't lead them back towards the ventilation duct access. He plunged deeper into the labyrinth of level 13, away from the spreading chaos. He moved with desperate urgency now, his flashlight beam bouncing erratically, illuminating tunnels that seemed to twist and shift before Elara's eyes. The floor remained uneven, treacherous with loose scree and slick patches of primordial ooze. The black, pulsing veins in the walls seemed more prominent here, closer to the surface, throbbing with a slow, malevolent rhythm synchronized with the deep groaning of the earth. The air grew thick, cloying, saturated with the smell of ozone, wet minerals, and an undertone Elara couldn't quite place, something ancient and organic, like tomb air mixed with copper. The distant rhythmic thumping they'd heard earlier was gone, swallowed by the pervasive groaning and the closer, more immediate sounds of the level tearing itself apart. Water dripped faster, sometimes sheeting down walls in greasy black curtains. Elara stumbled, her foot catching on a loose rock. She pitched forward, catching herself on the damp wall. Her hand slid through a patch of the black, vein-like substance. It was strangely warm, yielding slightly under her touch, like thick hide over pulsing muscle. She snatched her hand back as if burned, wiping it frantically on her trousers, a wave of nausea washing over her. The library wasn't just a structure. It was a living, diseased organism, and they were crawling through its deepest, most infected tissues. Silas pulled her onward. He seemed to be following another set of barely visible markings scratched onto the stone, older and cruder than the library's own system. Primal symbols that spoke of roots known only to those who had spent lifetimes hiding in these depths. He kept glancing back, his face taut with anxiety, listening intently to the sounds of destruction echoing behind them. They navigated a maze of corridors, each more dilapidated than the last. Some were partially collapsed, forcing them to squeeze through narrow gaps or climb over piles of fallen rock. In one section, the floor had given way entirely, revealing a chasm dropping into absolute darkness below. A terrifyingly narrow ledge, slick with moisture, was their only path across. Silas crossed first, testing each step, then guided Elara with hand signals, his flashlight beam fixed on her feet, then on her hands as she hugged the wall inch by inch, the groaning abyss yawning beside her. Emerging into another corridor, they found more evidence of Morkan's passage and its aftermath. A discarded sonic emitter lay smashed against a pillar, its casing cracked. Nearby, a bloat, one of the rock-encrusted variants, lay inert, partially dissolved into a black, tarry puddle that was slowly being reabsorbed by the pulsing veins in the floor. But something else had passed this way too. Huge, gouging tracks scarred the stone, not footprints but drag marks, as if something immense and heavy with jagged edges had scraped its way through. Accompanying the tracks were spatters of viscous, oily fluid that smelled faintly of crushed minerals and something hideously organic. Silas shone his light on the tracks, then swept it up the walls. The stone here was scored, deeply gouged, as if by immense claws or grinding teeth made of rock itself. He wrote quickly, his hand shaking, "Stone WALKS, Earth BLEEDS, the Deep Guardian awake." The Deep Guardian. Elara didn't need to ask. The library, or whatever intelligence resided within it, had defenses far older and more terrible than the bloats formed from mere ink. It had guardians formed from the very rock and earth, corrupted and animated by the same dark source. They pressed on, the sounds of pursuit seeming to fade slightly, replaced by the constant groaning and shifting of the level itself. The air pressure fluctuated wildly, making Elara's ears pop and her head swim. They entered a wider passage where the black veins converged, running thick and dense across the walls and floor, pulsing with a brighter, more insistent light. The air hummed with palpable energy. Silas stopped. He pointed ahead with a trembling finger. At the end of the passage, where the veins seemed to coalesce into a single, massive node embedded in the far wall, something else waited. It looked at first like another bloat. A large, vaguely humanoid shape slumped against the wall, glistening black, but it wasn't amorphous. It had defined edges, the shape of a man in tactical gear, and it wasn't entirely black. Patches of pale skin, fragments of uniform were visible, seemingly embedded within the inky mass, like flies trapped in amber. The figure slowly turned its head towards them. Its face was a horrifying mosaic. Half was the smooth, featureless black of an ink bloat. The other half was recognizably human, though distorted, stretched, the eye wide with perpetual terror, the mouth open in a silent scream. But words did emerge, not from the mouth, but seemingly projected directly into Elara's mind, layered, echoing, filled with the stolen memories and dying thoughts of the absorbed victim, overlaid with the cold, alien hunger of the ink. Run, it reads. It reads all, palimpsest, sees your thoughts, wants your words, join the text. The palimpsest bloat, Scrivener had warned them. This variant didn't just consume. It layered, it absorbed consciousness, it spoke with the voices of its victims. It stood directly in their path, blocking the only way forward in this section of the tunnels, its single human eye fixing on Elara, its composite mind probing, tasting her fear. Behind them, from the direction they had fled, a new sound arose, the heavy, scraping drag of the stone guardian, drawing closer. They were trapped between the psychic horror of the palimpsest and the physical, geological terror pursuing them. Silas made a choked sound, backing away from the palimpsest. He fumbled with his whiteboard but seemed unable to decide what warning to write, what escape to suggest. There was no escape. The palimpsest bloat took a step towards them, its movements unnervingly fluid, half ink, half stolen flesh. Its human eye locked onto Elara's, and the chorus of stolen thoughts intensified in her mind. Pretty words. Bookmender knows words. Give them. Give us. Be part of the archive. Forever. Elara raised her hands, trembling, her small tool satchel feeling utterly useless. The scraping behind them grew louder, closer. The floor vibrated. There was nowhere to run. The palimpsest stretched out a hand, half black ooze, half human fingers, reaching for her mind, for her memories, for herself. Chapter 6. Between Stone and Script. The palimpsest bloat glided forward, its composite form radiating a chilling psychic pressure. The stolen voices swirled in Elara's head, a nauseating vortex of fragmented memories, dying pleas, and the cold, consuming hunger of the ink. So much text, unseen, unread. Join the collation. Add your narrative. Its human eye, trapped in the fluid mask, fixed on her with terrifying intensity. Its bifurcated hand, half black ooze, half stolen flesh, reached. Behind them, the grinding scrape of the stone guardian grew louder, closer. The stone floor vibrated with its approach. Dust sifted from the low ceiling. Trapped. The word echoed in Elara's mind, almost drowned out by the palimpsest's invasive whispers. Silas acted. With a choked grunt, he shoved Elara sideways, hard, not towards escape, but towards the wall thick with pulsing black veins, near the massive energy node the palimpsest seemed anchored to. He pointed frantically at a section of the wall beside the node, a spot that looked like solid, vein-laced rock. He slammed his palm against it, then made a rapid crawling gesture, his eyes wide with desperate urgency. A hidden way, here, so close to the creature and the power source. The palimpsest turned its head slowly, its attention momentarily diverted by Silas's abrupt movement. The psychic pressure lessened fractionally. The silent one knows old paths, dusty words, irrelevant script. That momentary lapse was all Silas needed. He scrambled towards the spot he'd indicated, pulling something small and metallic from within his worn uniform, a heavy, specialized wrench or lever. He jammed its tip into a barely visible seam near the base of the node, leveraging it with all his wiry strength. A low groan, different from the stone's protest, issued from the wall. A section of rock, cleverly disguised and integrated with the pulsing veins, began to pivot inward, revealing a dark, narrow opening low to the ground. But the action drew the palimpsest's full attention back. Trickery, old deviations, all text converges, all paths lead to the index. It abandoned its focus on Elara and surged towards Sela's and the opening, moving with terrifying speed, its form rippling. The stone guardian's scraping was almost upon them now, filling the corridor behind. Elara could feel the immense pressure of its approach, a physical weight in the air. "Sela's!" Elara screamed, the sound swallowed by the cacophony. Sela's ignored her, straining at the lever, widening the opening inch by agonizing inch. The palimpsest was meters away, hand outstretched, the stolen voices in Elara's head reaching a fever pitch of anticipation and hunger. Think Elara's mind raced, fueled by sheer terror. Her tools, satchel, chemicals, what did she have? Solvents, stabilizers. She fumbled with the satchel clasp, her fingers numb. What reacts with ink, with this ink? This living, energy-charged ooze? She pulled out a small spray bottle filled with a specialized alcohol-based solvent used for carefully cleaning fragile pigments. Maybe useless, maybe volatile. The palimpsest was almost upon Sela's. The hidden opening was just wide enough to crawl through. Behind them, the stone guardian's immense, jagged form scraped into view at the corridor's entrance, a moving wall of corrupted rock and blind fury, instantly drawn towards the energy radiating from the node and the movement near it. No time. Elara didn't aim for the palimpsest itself. That felt futile. She aimed for the connection, for the point where the creature seemed to draw power or information, the massive, brightly pulsing energy node it guarded. Praying it wasn't shielded, praying this wasn't suicidal, she depressed the sprayer, sending a fine mist of the volatile solvent directly onto the node's glistening surface. The reaction was instantaneous and violent. The solvent hit the raw energy node and the node flashed. Not an explosion, but an eruption of blinding white light, accompanied by a high-pitched, electrical screech that dwarfed the sonic emitters Morkant had used. The pulsing black veins connected to it flared incandescently, then went dark. The psychic voices battering Elara's mind vanished, cut off mid-word, replaced by a deafening mental static. The palimpsest recoiled as if struck, its form flickering, destabilizing. Its connection to the node, its power source or anchor, was violently severed. It let out a soundless psychic scream of agony and confusion, its human half contorting, its ink half boiling and receding. Sela's seized the moment. He dropped the lever, shoved himself through the narrow opening and reached back, grabbing Elara's arm, pulling her down just as the stone guardian, enraged or disoriented by the energy flare, slammed its massive, rocky limb into the space where they had been standing. Rock splintered. The palimpsest shrieked psychically as the guardian's blow glanced off it, tearing away chunks of its destabilized form. Sela's hauled Elara through the opening into suffocating darkness beyond. He slammed his shoulder against the hidden door which groaned shut, cutting off the blinding light and the screeching static. They collapsed onto a dusty, unseen floor, chests heaving, darkness absolute. Behind the sealed panel, they heard the muffled sounds of titanic conflict, the stone guardian's mindless, grinding rage impacting against the weakened, flailing palimpsest. Rock struck dissolving ink, psychic static warred with geological fury. The sounds were terrifying, but blessedly outside. Elara lay gasping on the cold floor, the phantom screams of the palimpsest slowly fading from her mind, leaving behind an aching emptiness. Her hand, still clutching the solvent bottle, trembled uncontrollably. It had worked. A desperate gamble, a conservationist's tool misused against eldritch horrors, had bought them precious seconds. After a long moment, Silas stirred. A faint click, and his flashlight beam weakly illuminated their new refuge. They were in another narrow passage, smaller even than the ventilation duct, seemingly hewn directly through the rock, bypassing the main corridors of level 13 entirely. It was utterly silent, the sounds of the battle outside muffled by thick stone. The air was stale but blessedly free of the overwhelming incandescent stench. Silas sat up slowly, checking himself for injuries. He looked at Elara, then at the solvent bottle still clutched in her hand. He gave a slow, almost wondering nod. He retrieved his whiteboard and marker, his hands shaking slightly. Solvent reactive, good, very loud. He looked back towards the hidden door, listening. Disturbance, buys time, not much. He shone the light further down the narrow passage. This path, old, pre-library, deep miners dug it, avoids worst of. Below asterisk, leads up. Slowly. Up, they were finally going up. Relief washed over Elara, so potent it almost brought tears. Towards the surface, she croaked. Silas shook his head. No, not surface, up towards. Middle levels, maybe 7, maybe 8, safe for there. He shrugged, a gesture that conveyed profound uncertainty. Must hurry, Guardian will break through. Palimpsest, remembers. The thought of the mind-stealing horror remembering her, hunting her, sent a fresh chill down Elara's spine. They couldn't rest. They pushed themselves to their feet, muscles aching, nerves frayed. Silas led the way, his flashlight beam weak, batteries clearly failing. The passage was rough, uneven, sloping gradually upwards. It felt ancient, claustrophobic, forgotten. The only sounds were their own ragged breaths and the scuff of their boots on the gritty floor. They traveled in weary silence for what felt like hours, the only marker of progress the slow, upward incline and the subtle shift in air quality, still stale, but less heavy, less charged with that subterranean wrongness. The pervasive groaning of level 13 faded behind and below them. Eventually, the narrow tunnel opened into a slightly wider space, a small, circular chamber carved from the rock. In the center stood a single, rusted metal ladder ascending into darkness. Silas shone his failing light upwards. The ladder vanished into blackness far above. Middle level's access shaft, old emergency route, long climb. He looked at the flashlight, shaking it slightly. The beam flickered, dimmed further. Battery low, must climb now, dark climb. Elara looked up into the shaft, swallowing hard. Another climb, longer this time and potentially in total darkness. But it led up, away from the stone guardian, the palimpsest, the waking nightmare of the lowest levels. "Let's go," she said, her voice steadier now. Survival instinct was overriding exhaustion. Silas nodded. He went to the ladder first, testing the lower rungs. They seemed more solid than the ones leading down to 13. He began to climb, moving steadily upwards into the darkness. Elara waited a moment, took a deep breath, secured her satchel, and started climbing after him, rung by cold, rusted rung, ascending into the unknown dark. The flashlight beam above grew fainter, then winked out entirely, leaving only the sound of Sela's climbing and the immense, pressing silence of the shaft. Chapter 7. The Upper Silence. Darkness, absolute and consuming. The climb became a mechanical rhythm divorced from sight, measured only by the burn in Elara's thighs, the ache in her shoulders, the rasp of her own breathing, and the scrape of Sela's movement somewhere above her in the black void. Rung after rung, cold metal biting into her gloved hands. The silence of the shaft was immense, broken only by their exertions and the occasional drip of unseen water echoing from far below or far above. Time dissolved again into an exhausting, sightless ascent. Fear remained a cold knot in her stomach, but the immediate terror had subsided, replaced by a bone-deep weariness and the grim determination to simply reach the next rung. Her mind drifted, replaying the horrors. The crawling ink flake, the whispering smudges, Scrivener's absorbed imprint, the psychic violation of the palimpsest, the grinding nightmare of the stone guardian. Images flashed behind her closed eyelids, stark against the blackness. The library wasn't just a repository. It was a wound, festering, breeding abominations from forgotten words and geological trauma. How high had they climbed? Hours seemed to pass. Her muscles screamed. Doubt returned. Was this shaft truly safe? Did it lead anywhere? Or was it just another dead end, a vertical tomb? She focused on the faint sounds of Sela's above her, a rhythmic scraping and breathing that proved she wasn't alone, that they were still moving upwards. Then a change. The air grew fractionally warmer, less damp. The quality of the silence shifted, less absolute, now containing a faint, almost subliminal hum, similar to the one on level 12 but cleaner, less oppressive. Sela's stopped climbing. Elara paused below him, listening intently. A faint scraping sound came from above, then a metallic clunk. A square of dim light appeared far overhead, pushing back the oppressive darkness. Sela's had reached a hatch or panel. He was opening it. Relief surged through Elara so powerfully her knees almost buckled on the rung. She resumed climbing, faster now, driven by the promise of light and escape from the shaft. The square of light grew larger, revealing the underside of a heavy metal hatch pushed open. Sela's thin form was silhouetted against it as he pulled himself up and out. He reached down, his hand appearing in the dim light. Elara grasped it and, with his help, hauled herself the last few rungs and scrambled out of the shaft onto a solid floor. Sela's immediately pulled the heavy hatch closed. It settled with a muted thud, sealing the shaft and its deep horrors below. A locking mechanism, rusted but functional, clicked into place as Sela's turned a wheel set into the hatch's surface. They were out. Elara lay on the floor for a moment, catching her breath, blinking against the sudden, albeit dim, light. They were in what looked like another service corridor, but vastly different from the hellish tunnels of 13 or the oppressive ring of 12. This corridor was clean, well-maintained. Smooth, gray panels lined the walls, hiding pipes and conduits. Recessed lighting strips in the ceiling cast a cool, even glow. The air circulated, cool and filtered, carrying only the faint scent of dust and old paper, the normal smell of a vast archive, not the diseased stench from below. The low hum of the building's systems was steady, unobtrusive. They seemed to have surfaced in a functioning, almost mundane part of the library. Silas leaned against the wall, looking utterly spent, his face gray with exhaustion in the sterile light. He offered Elara a small, weary nod, then pointed down the corridor. He retrieved his whiteboard, which looked incongruously grimy in these clean surroundings, and wrote, Level 8, Service Access Epsilon, used rarely. He wiped it, then added, should be quiet here. Day shift ended hours ago. Night shift minimal, avoids deep storage. Quiet, minimal staff. It sounded almost safe. Elara pushed herself up, her body protesting every movement. She looked down at herself, clothes torn, filthy, smeared with grime, and who knew what else from the levels below. Silas looked little better, his uniform practically disintegrating. They were refugees washed up from a subterranean war zone. "What now?" Elara asked, her voice raspy. Can we get out?" Silas considered this, then slowly shook his head. Main exits monitored. Quill knows access protocols, knows you arrived, knows Morkant's team overdue. He tapped his temple. Library watches, sensors, not just cameras. He paused, then wrote, need rest, supplies, information, then, maybe a way. He gestured down the corridor again. Storeroom nearby, old maps, maybe rations. They started walking, their footsteps loud on the polished floor after the silence and rough stone below. They moved cautiously, peering around corners, listening intently. The corridor remained deserted. They passed numbered doors, presumably leading to archive stacks or offices, all dark, all silent. It was eerily calm compared to the chaos they'd survived. Yet, Elara couldn't shake a deep-seated unease. The library felt different here, cleaner, more controlled, but the sense of being watched, the panopticon's unseen gaze, felt stronger, more insidious. They found the storeroom Silas remembered. The lock was simple. Silas bypassed it quickly with a thin piece of metal extracted from his seemingly endless pockets. Inside were dusty shelves holding rolled-up schematics, spare light fixtures, cleaning supplies, and, thankfully, several sealed boxes of emergency rations and bottled water. They looked ancient but intact. Elara tore into a foil-wrapped protein bar, ravenously hungry. Silas drank water slowly, his eyes scanning the dusty schematics unrolled on a small table. He seemed to be searching for something specific, tracing lines with a bony finger. Elara looked around the small, cluttered room. It felt like a pocket of normalcy, a breath held against the crushing immensity of the library. But the memory of the things below, the bloats, the palimpsest, the stone guardian, was a fresh wound. And the prime blot, the source, the ink Father Morkant sought. It was still down there, perhaps stirred further by the drill, by the guardian's awakening. Silas suddenly stiffened. He tilted his head, listening. Elara strained her ears too. Faintly, very faintly, carried through the ventilation system or the building's structure itself, came a sound. A soft, rhythmic drip. 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 It wasn't water, it sounded thicker somehow, more viscous. Silas met Elara's eyes. his own reflecting a flicker of the deep-seated fear she thought they'd left behind on level 12. He slowly, carefully, began re-rolling the schematic he was studying. He picked up his whiteboard, wrote one word and underlined it heavily. Listen. They stood in silence, straining to hear. The dripping sound continued, faint but persistent. It seemed to be coming from somewhere relatively close, perhaps the main corridor outside the storeroom. Was it just a leaky pipe in this older section? Or was it something else? A stray whispering smudge that had somehow reached the upper levels. A harbinger. Elara felt a cold dread seep back into her, chilling the relief she'd felt moments before. They had climbed out of the abyss, but the infection wasn't contained. The ink, the sentient words, the library's dark consciousness, it wasn't just below. It permeated the entire structure. Level 8 might be cleaner, quieter, but it wasn't safe. It was just a higher circle of the same hell. Silas carefully packed a few ration bars and water bottles into a dilapidated canvas bag he found on a shelf. He slung it over his shoulder. He looked at Elara, his expression grim, resigned. He gestured towards the door, then held up a hand, cautioning silence. He cracked the door open a mere centimeter, peering out into the empty, sterile corridor. The dripping sound seemed slightly louder now. Drip, 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 steady, measured, coming from further down the hallway. Silas looked back at Elara. No whiteboard needed. His eyes said it all. The horror wasn't over. It had followed them. Or perhaps it had been waiting here all along. They had escaped the depths, but they were still trapped within the Panopticon Bibliotheca Ultima, and the library itself was the ultimate cage, the ultimate monster. Their journey wasn't finished. It had merely entered a new, quieter, perhaps even more insidious phase. The upper silence held its own dread. The end.